I didn't leave my marriage because the love ran out. I left because the woman I worshipped looked at the blueprint of my soul and laughed. 5 years later, that same laughter would turn into silence as she watched the world applaud the very thing she threw in the trash. The silence in the kitchen wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, the kind of suffocating quiet that precedes a natural disaster. Ethan sat at the small, scarred oak table, his hands trembling slightly as he smoothed out the schematics. The smell of burnt coffee and tension hung in the air. "Say something," Ethan whispered, not daring to look up. Jessica stood by the granite island, a receipt crumpled in her manicured fist. She wasn't screaming. Screaming would have implied passion, or at least anger. Instead, she looked at him with a cold, exhausted disappointment that cut deeper than any blade. She was dressed for a showing. Pristine beige blazer, hair perfectly coiffed, a stark contrast to Ethan's oil-stained t-shirt and tired eyes. $4,000, Ethan, she said, her voice flat. You drained the joint savings account, again, for this? She gestured vaguely at the complex drawings of the micro-turbine prototype. It's the capacitor, Ethan pleaded, finally meeting her gaze. Jess, I finally cracked the efficiency issue. This isn't just a gadget. This is the future of portable energy. If I can get the prototype to hold a charge for 12 hours, I have a meeting with... Stop, she interrupted, closing her eyes as if his voice gave her a migraine. Just stop. I am so tired of hearing about the future. I am trying to build a life in the present, Ethan. I'm trying to pay the mortgage. I'm trying to maintain a reputation in this town. Do you know how humiliating it is when the girls ask what my husband does, and I have to say he's tinkering in the garage like an unemployed college dropout? Ethan felt the heat rise in his cheeks. I'm an engineer, Jessica. I'm building something that matters. You're 34 years old. Her voice cracked, finally showing an edge of venom. You're not Elon Musk. You're a man with a mountain of credit card debt and a wife who is sick of carrying you. She walked over to the table and picked up the main schematic. It was the result of 3 years of sleepless nights. She looked at it like it was trash. I spoke to my father today, she said, dropping the paper back onto the table with a dismissive flutter. He offered you a job at the dealership, sales floor. It's 80 grand a year plus commission. You take it or we're done. The ultimatum hung in the air, vibrating. Ethan looked at the woman he had married 5 years ago. He remembered her ambition, her drive. He realized now that her ambition was specific. She wanted security, status, and predictability. She didn't want a partner who dreamed. She wanted a partner who provided. I can't do that, Jess, Ethan said quietly. I'm close. I can feel it. Jessica let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a cruel sound. You're delusional. You're chasing a ghost, and you're dragging me down into the mud with you. I won't let you ruin my credit score for a toy that nobody wants. She pulled a folder from her briefcase and slammed it onto the counter. I had these drawn up last week. I was hoping I wouldn't have to use them, but looking at you now, looking at how pathetic this is, I know I'm making the right choice. Ethan stared at the folder. He didn't need to read the label to know what it was. Divorce papers. You had them ready? He asked, his voice hollow. I'm a realist, Ethan. One of us has to be. She checked her watch. I have an open house in 20 minutes. By the time I get back, I want you and your invention out of my house. Go to your brother's. Go to a shelter. I don't care. Just take your debt with you. She turned on her heel, the clicking of her heels on the hardwood floor sounding like nails in a coffin. She grabbed her keys and paused at the door, looking back one last time. There was no love in her eyes, only relief. Grow up, Ethan, she sneered. Nobody is ever going to buy that thing. You're going to die broke and alone, and I refuse to be there to watch it happen. The door slammed. The sound echoed through the empty house. Ethan sat there for a long time, the silence ringing in his ears. Grow up, pathetic, broke. The words burned. Slowly, he reached out and touched the schematic. His hand wasn't trembling anymore. A cold steel resolve settled in his chest, replacing the heartbreak. He stood up. He didn't pack his clothes first. He packed the drawings. He packed the hard drives. He packed the prototype components carefully into a padded box. He took the wedding photo off the mantel, looked at it for a second, and placed it face down on the table next to the divorce papers. He grabbed his duffel bag and walked out the front door. He didn't look back at the house that was no longer a home. He looked at the horizon. It was going to be a cold night, but for the first time in years, the air felt clean. The studio apartment was actually a converted basement in a crumbling brick building on the wrong side of the river. It smelled perpetually of damp concrete and someone else's boiled cabbage. There was one window, a narrow slit near the ceiling, that offered a view of passing ankles and tires splashing through puddles. Ethan sat on a mattress on the floor, his back pressed against the cold cinder blocks. It had been 3 months since he walked out of the suburban colonial he used to call home. In that time, he had learned exactly how much of his identity had been tied to the life Jessica had curated for them. Without the house, the car, and the dual income, he wasn't Ethan the eccentric engineer. He was just another broke guy in a hoodie buying generic peanut butter. He looked at his bank balance on his cracked phone screen, $412.18. Rent was due in 4 days. He needed $600. He looked over at the folding card table he'd salvaged from a dumpster. It was the only furniture in the room, and it was groaning under the weight of the prototype. The micro-turbine looked like a mess of wires and machined aluminum, ugly and raw. It was the reason he was eating ramen for the 20th night in a row. It was the reason he was sleeping on the floor. A heavy knock on the door made him jump. He wasn't expecting guests. He didn't have any friends left. Most of them were couples friends who had sided with Jessica, the stable one, the victim of his manic financial irresponsibility. Ethan opened the door to find a courier standing there, looking bored. "Ethan Miller?" "Yeah." "Sign here." He handed over a thick manila envelope. Ethan knew the weight of it immediately. He closed the door, slid down against the wood, and tore the seal. The divorce decree, the final version. He flipped through the legalese, his eyes scanning for the changes Jessica had insisted on. She hadn't just wanted a divorce, she wanted an excision. She wanted to cut him out like a tumor. Page 14. Division of Assets and Liabilities. He read the clause she had added, highlighted in yellow by his own lawyer, with a note that just said, "She's adamant about this. Just sign it so we can close." The wife, Jessica Miller, hereby waives any and all current and future interest, ownership, or claim regarding the husband's, Ethan Miller, intellectual property, specifically the project known as Project Ether, and any related patents, prototypes, or business ventures derived thereof. In exchange, the husband assumes sole and full responsibility for all debts incurred in the development of said project, $48,000 USD, and releases the wife from any financial liability regarding future bankruptcy proceedings. Ethan read it twice. It was brutal in its clarity. She was terrified that his toy would drag her down, so she was legally fortifying her walls. She was trading a potential lottery ticket for the safety of zero debt. She was betting everything against him. He reached for a pen. His hand hovered over the signature line. A memory flashed, their wedding day. Jessica whispering that they were a team, that they would build an empire. He realized now she only wanted an empire if it came pre-assembled. She had no stomach for the construction site. He signed his name, Ethan Miller. With that ink, he owned 100% of his debt. But he also owned 100% of his dream. Later that afternoon, Ethan walked 3 miles to a pawn shop on 4th Street. He carried a small velvet box in his pocket. The broker behind the glass loop looked at the Rolex Submariner, a wedding gift from Jessica's father. "It's scratched," the guy grunted. "The movement is perfect," Ethan said, his voice raspy from disuse. "It's worth $8,000. "I'll give you 2. 5. 2.5. Take it or leave it." Ethan looked at the watch. It was a symbol of the leash he had worn for 5 years, the golden handcuffs. "Done," Ethan said. He walked out with $2,500 in cash. He didn't go to the grocery store. He didn't pay his rent immediately. He went to the electronics supply store. He bought the high-grade copper coils he had been agonizing over for weeks. He bought a new soldering iron. He bought a voltage regulator that cost more than his monthly food budget. He returned to the basement as the sun was setting, casting long, dark shadows across the room. He sat at the wobbly card table and turned on a single desk lamp. The light focused on the turbine. He picked up the screwdriver. He was hungry. He was lonely. Ideally, he should be crying over the end of his marriage. But as he looked at the mechanism, the intricate dance of physics and potential, he felt a strange, cold calm. Jessica thought she had buried him. She thought this basement was his grave. Ethan tightened a screw, the metal biting into place with a satisfying click. "Watch me," he whispered to the empty room. He worked through the night. He didn't sleep. By the time the sun came up, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, the prototype was humming. It was a low, steady sound, like a heartbeat. He wasn't at rock bottom anymore. He was at the foundation. 6 months later, Ethan sat in the waiting room of Thorn Capital, his suit feeling 2 sizes too big. It was the same suit he had worn to his wedding rehearsal dinner, now hanging loosely on a frame thinned by months of ramen noodles and adrenaline. He checked his bag for the 10th time. The prototype, wrapped in bubble wrap and old t-shirts, was there. The receptionist, a young man with a sharp haircut, called his name. "Mr. Miller, Marcus will see you now." Ethan walked into an office that smelled of leather and old money. Marcus Thorn was a legend in the tech world, known for betting on long shots that turned into unicorns. He was older than Ethan expected, with steel gray hair and eyes that seemed to dismantle you like a complex engine. "You have 10 minutes, Thorn said, not looking up from his tablet. "Impress me." Ethan didn't waste time with a pitch deck or buzzwords about synergy. He didn't have the charisma for it, and frankly, he was too tired to pretend. He simply placed the device on the mahogany desk. It was roughly the size of a toaster, an ugly brick of metal and wire. "This is the Ether 1, Ethan said, his voice steady. "It's a kinetic thermal hybrid generator. It pulls energy from ambient heat and motion. I charged it 48 hours ago." He pulled a high-intensity LED floodlight from his bag, the kind used on construction sites, and plugged it into the small box. He flipped the switch. The room was instantly bathed in blinding white light. Thorn looked up. He stared at the light, then at the small box, then at the clock on the wall. He let it run. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. The light didn't flicker. The box didn't overheat. Thorn stood up and walked around the desk. He touched the casing of the prototype. "It's cool to the touch," he muttered. "The efficiency rate, that's impossible." "It's 94%, Ethan corrected him. "Current market standard is 60. Thorn looked at Ethan for the first time, really looked at him. He saw the frayed cuffs of his shirt, the dark circles under his eyes, and the desperate, quiet hunger of a man who had bet his life on a piece of metal. "Who else have you shown this to?" Thorn asked. "No one," Ethan replied. "My wife, my ex-wife. She said it was a toy." Thorn let out a low chuckle. "Then your ex-wife just made the most expensive mistake in history." He opened a drawer and pulled out a checkbook. "I'm not going to buy this from you, Ethan. I'm going to build a company around you. But I need to know one thing. Are you ready to disappear? Because to make this scalable, to make this safe for the market, you need to go underground. No press, no leaks, just work. For years." Ethan thought of the empty basement. He thought of the silence that waited for him every night. "I have nothing else to do," he said. The next 2 years were a blur of fluorescent lights and white lab coats. With Thorn's backing, Ethan moved from the basement to a secure facility in Palo Alto. He had a team of 20 engineers working under him, people with PhDs from MIT and Stanford who called him boss and looked at his designs with reverence. His bank account, once a source of panic, now held a number with 6 zeros, simply a signing bonus. He moved into a penthouse overlooking the bay. It was sleek, modern, and cold. One Friday night, after a breakthrough on the stabilizer unit, the team went out for drinks to celebrate. They invited him, of course. "Come on, Ethan," his lead engineer Sarah urged. "You need a break. You haven't left the lab before midnight in 3 weeks. I have some data to review, he lied. He went home to his glass tower. Ideally, this was the moment of triumph. He poured himself a glass of expensive scotch, the kind Jessica's father used to drink but never offered him. He stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. He pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over the contacts list. Jessica's number was still there, buried but not deleted. The urge to call her was visceral. He wanted to say, "I did it. I was right. Look at where I am." He wanted to hear the shock in her voice. He wanted validation. Even after everything, the ghost of their marriage haunted the corners of his success. He wanted to share the win, even if it was just to prove her wrong. But then he remembered the look on her face in the kitchen, the disgust. Grow up, Ethan. She hadn't just rejected the invention, she had rejected him. She had looked at the core of who he was and found it wanting. If he called her now, he was just seeking approval from the person who had destroyed him. He deleted the number. The silence in the penthouse was different from the silence in the basement. In the basement, the silence was heavy with fear. Here, it was heavy with finality. He had won. He was on his way to changing the world. But he was doing it alone. He turned away from the window and walked back to his desk. He opened his laptop. There was work to do. Work was reliable. Work didn't leave. Work didn't mock you. The grind continued, silent and relentless, building a monument to a dream that had cost him everything. 3 years later, Jessica's life was exactly what she had ordered. It was a masterpiece of beige predictability. She sat on her patio, sipping an iced tea, looking out over the manicured lawn of her new home in the gated community of Willow Creek. Her husband, Mark, was inside watching golf. Mark was a commercial insurance underwriter. He was kind. He had a hairline that was slowly receding in a dignified way, and he never, ever forgot to pay a bill. He was the antithesis of Ethan. There were no late-night frantic scribblings, no oil stains on the carpet, and certainly no delusional dreams of changing the world. Jessica told herself every single day that she was happy. She had the security she had screamed for. She had the lease on the new Mercedes SUV. She had her name on the board of the local charity league. Yet there was a hollowness to the silence of her afternoons. It was a boredom that felt like a slow-acting poison. With Ethan, even the arguments had possessed a certain kinetic energy. With Mark, life was a flat line. A safe, comfortable, flat line. Inside the house, the television was humming with the low murmur of a financial news network. Mark was obsessed with the stock market, tracking his index funds with the same mild enthusiasm he applied to mowing the lawn. "Honey, you hear about this Ether IPO everyone is buzzing about?" Mark called out through the screen door. Jessica sighed, putting down her magazine. "Mark, it's Sunday. Do we have to talk about portfolios?" "It's not just a portfolio thing, Jess. It's wild. They're saying this company came out of nowhere. Silicon Valley is losing its mind. They claim they've solved the portable energy crisis, something about kinetic thermal hybrids." Jessica froze for a fraction of a second. The words triggered a faint, scratching memory at the back of her skull. Kinetic. Thermal. She remembered Ethan rambling about those words over a dinner of cold pizza 4 years ago. She pushed the thought away violently. That was nonsense. That was Ethan's sci-fi fantasy. This was the real world, where serious companies like Tesla or General Electric handled those things. "It's probably just another bubble," Jessica said, walking into the living room. "Remember Theranos? Remember FTX? It's all smoke and mirrors." "Maybe," Mark said, munching on a pretzel. "But the rumors are weird. The CEO is a ghost. No interviews, no photos, just patents. They call him the Iron Monk because he apparently hasn't left his lab in 3 years. They're doing the global reveal next week." Jessica glanced at the TV screen. The graphic showed a sleek, minimalist logo, a stylized blue flame inside a circle. It looked nothing like the jagged, hand-drawn sketches Ethan used to leave on their kitchen table. "Well, good for him," Jessica said dismissively. "I'm sure he's some 20-year-old prodigy from Stanford with rich parents." She walked into the kitchen to start dinner. She needed to distract herself. Lately, the ghost of her past had been harder to exorcise. It wasn't that she missed Ethan. She assured herself she didn't. She missed the potential of him, or at least the version of him she had tried to mold. But he had been too stubborn, too fixated on his invention. She chopped vegetables with aggressive precision. She had been right to leave. She had to be. If she hadn't left, she would still be drowning in his debt. She would be the wife of a failure. She looked at her granite countertops, her stainless steel appliances, her diamond tennis bracelet. This was reality. This was success. Her phone buzzed on the counter. It was a notification from a local news app. Tech world holds breath. Ether Dynamics poised to become the most valuable startup in history upon Tuesday's launch. She swiped the notification away. Why did that name irritate her so much? Ether. It sounded pretentiously classical. Exactly the kind of name Ethan would have loved. Stop it, she told herself. Ethan is probably managing a Radio Shack in Ohio by now. Or maybe he finally took that job at her father's dealership, swallowing his pride years too late. She hadn't checked on him. She had blocked his number, his email, and his social media the day the divorce was finalized. She wanted a clean break. "Mark," she called out, her voice a little too sharp. "Turn the channel. Put on something else. Anything else." Okay, Mark replied, sensing her mood shift. He clicked the remote. The financial analyst vanished, replaced by a sitcom reruns. Jessica leaned against the counter, taking a deep breath. She felt a strange tightness in her chest, a premonition she couldn't name. It felt like the air pressure dropping before a storm. She looked at her reflection in the dark window of the oven. She looked perfect. She looked secure. So why did she feel like the ground was about to open up and swallow her whole? She went back to chopping carrots. Chop, chop, chop. The rhythm was soothing. She focused on the mundane, on the safe, on the known. She didn't know that miles away, in a studio filled with cameras and global press, the Iron Monk was adjusting his tie, preparing to step into the light she had denied him. She didn't know that her perfect life was acting as a fragile dam against a tidal wave of regret that was days away from crashing down. "Dinner in 10, she announced, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The dinner party at the Harrisons' estate was the epitome of the social circle Jessica had worked so hard to infiltrate. Crystal flutes clinked against fine china. The air smelled of roasted duck and expensive perfume, and the conversation was a steady, polite hum about yacht club memberships and private school tuitions. Jessica sat between Mark and a dermatologist named Greg, nodding politely as Greg explained the tax benefits of his new vacation home in Aspen. She felt a sense of arrival. This was it. This was the table she belonged at. She took a sip of Pinot Noir, feeling the cool glass against her lips, grounding herself in the luxury of the moment. "All right, everyone, hush up for a second," boomed Cliff Harrison, the host. He was a large man who owned a chain of car dealerships and loved to be the center of attention. He stood by the massive 85-inch television mounted above the fireplace. "It's starting. My broker told me this is going to be the biggest thing since the iPhone. We need to see who this wizard is." The room quieted down, though a few guests exchanged amused glances. It was rare for a dinner party to be interrupted by television, but the hype around Ether Dynamics had reached a fever pitch that transcended social etiquette. It was a global event, simulcast in 40 languages. "I heard the founder is a recluse," a woman across the table whispered loud enough for Jessica to hear. "They say he turned down a buyout offer from Google for $10 billion last week. $10 billion! Jessica rolled her eyes slightly. "Probably an urban legend," she murmured to Mark. "Nobody turns down $10 billion. The screen went black. The room fell silent. Then, a single, pulsating blue light appeared in the center of the void. The sound from the speakers wasn't music. It was a rhythmic, low-frequency hum, the sound of raw energy. The logo of Ether Dynamics faded in, crisp and elegant. The camera cut to a wide shot of a stage in San Francisco. There were no dancers, no fireworks, no hype man. just a single spotlight illuminating a simple wooden stool and a small table holding a metallic device. A voiceover announced, calm and authoritative, "Please welcome the founder and lead architect of Ether Dynamics." A man walked out from the shadows. He was wearing a charcoal suit tailored to perfection. He walked with a calm, predatory grace. He didn't wave to the cheering crowd, he simply nodded, acknowledging them with a quiet confidence that commanded absolute silence. Jessica dropped her fork. It hit the porcelain plate with a sharp clatter that echoed in the sudden quiet of the dining room. She stopped breathing. The blood drained from her face so fast she felt dizzy. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. It was Ethan. But it wasn't the Ethan she remembered. The Ethan she knew was slumped shoulders, nervous tics, and apologetic eyes. He was a man who asked permission to exist. This man on the screen was a titan. His beard was trimmed sharp, his hair styled. But it was his eyes that froze her heart. They were clear, focused, and utterly devoid of the fear she had always associated with him. "Holy cow," Mark said, leaning forward. "That guy looks intense." Jessica couldn't speak. Her throat had constricted into a tight, dry knot. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. "No, this isn't real. This is a hallucination." "Good evening," Ethan said. His voice, amplified by the sound system, filled the Harrisons' living room. It was deeper, richer than she remembered. 5 years ago, I was told that the concept of infinite, sustainable portable energy was a toy. I was told I was chasing a ghost. Jessica felt a wave of nausea. He was quoting her. He was quoting the exact words she had spat at him in their kitchen. "I was told," Ethan continued, pacing slowly across the stage, "to grow up, to stop dreaming, to accept the reality of a paycheck and a mediocre life." He paused, looking directly into the camera. For a terrifying second, Jessica felt like he was looking through the screen, straight into her soul, stripping away her expensive blazer and her jewelry to reveal the panic underneath. "But the thing about reality," Ethan said, a small, wry smile touching his lips, "is that it is malleable. It is clay in the hands of those who refuse to listen to the noise. Tonight, I am not here to show you a toy. I am here to show you the end of the fossil fuel era." He placed his hand on the device, the very device Jessica had called garbage. The crowd in the auditorium erupted. "Is that?" Mark squinted at the screen, then turned to Jessica. "Hey Jess, didn't your ex-husband's name start with an E? Evan? Eric?" Jessica couldn't turn her head. She was locked on the screen. She was watching the man she had thrown away like broken furniture standing on top of the world. The $10 billion, the global acclaim, the genius. It had all been there, sleeping in her garage, and she had kicked it out. "It's Ethan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What?" Mark asked. "Ethan," she said louder, her voice cracking. "His name is Ethan." The room was still focused on the TV, mesmerized by Ethan's demonstration of the device powering an entire server rack. But Jessica wasn't seeing the technology. She was seeing the past rewriting itself. She was seeing every sacrifice she thought she had made to protect herself, turning into the biggest miscalculation of her life. She looked around the table at these people she had tried so hard to impress. Cliff Harrison, with his car dealerships. Greg, with his vacation home. Suddenly, they looked small. They looked like children playing with Monopoly money. And she, sitting among them, was the biggest fool of all. On the screen, Ethan picked up the microphone for his final point. "Every invention has a story," Ethan said softly, "and every story has a name. When I built this, I had to decide what to call it. I had to decide what legacy I wanted to leave behind." Jessica's heart hammered against her ribs. She waited, a sick mix of dread and irrational hope rising in her chest. Did he still care? Was there a piece of her left in him? The silence in the Harrison dining room was absolute. Even Cliff Harrison, a man who loved the sound of his own voice above all else, sat motionless, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. On the screen, the camera zoomed in on Ethan's face. He looked older than his 39 years, with fine lines etched around his eyes, scars of sleepless nights and relentless pressure. But those lines only added to the gravity of his presence. "When I started this journey," Ethan said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming intimate, as if he were speaking to a close friend rather than a global audience of millions, "I was entirely alone. I was living in a basement with no heat, eating one meal a day, and sleeping on a floor next to a water heater." Jessica felt a flush of heat crawl up her neck. She knew that basement. She knew exactly where he had gone after she locked the door. She looked down at her lap, terrified that if she made eye contact with anyone at the table, they would somehow see the scarlet letter branded on her chest. "In those moments of darkness," Ethan continued, "when the world tells you that you are worthless, you look for an anchor. You look for a name that means something." He walked over to the device, the ether one, which was now humming softly, casting a blue halo around his hands. "Many of you have asked why the parent company is structured the way it is," Ethan said. "Why I refused the acquisition offers, why I insisted on retaining absolute control." He paused, and for a fleeting, delirious second, Jessica's heart skipped a beat. A wild, irrational thought sparked in her brain. Is he going to mention me? Is he going to say that the heartbreak fueled him? That he did it to prove himself to the woman he loved? Even now, her narcissism tried to find a way to make his success about her. If he mentioned her, even in anger, she mattered. She was part of the story. "I am legally changing the designation of this technology today," Ethan announced. "It will no longer be just a product of ether dynamics. From this moment forward, the core technology will be known as the Mercer Kinetic Drive." The name hung in the air. Mercer. Mark frowned, chewing on his lip. "Mercer? Is that a physics term?" Jessica felt the blood leave her body. She knew that name. It wasn't a physics term. "Mercer," Ethan said, his eyes softening for the first time, "was my mother's maiden name. She was a school teacher who died when I was 20. She didn't understand engineering. She couldn't read a schematic to save her life. But she never, not once, told me to stop asking, 'How does this work?' She never told me to be realistic. She told me that the only failure is the refusal to try." Ethan placed a hand on the sleek metal casing of the drive. "There were people in my life who loved the idea of success, but hated the process of it," he said. The softness in his eyes hardened into something like steel. "People who wanted the view from the summit, but refused to climb the mountain. They mocked the blueprints. They called my dream a liability." Jessica stopped breathing. The specific phrasing, liability, was a direct quote from their final argument. It was a sniper shot, fired from 5 years in the future, landing squarely in her chest. "When you build something that changes the world," Ethan said, his voice ringing with finality, "you have to be careful whose name you etch into the foundation. You don't build a monument to the people who handed you a shovel to bury yourself. You build it for the ones who would have held the flashlight." He looked directly into the camera lens. "This is for Mercer, a name that represents unshakable faith, a name that never walked out when the money ran dry." The audience in the auditorium rose to their feet in a thunderous standing ovation. The applause was a physical wall of sound. On the screen, Ethan stood alone, bathed in the blue light of his creation, a titan of industry, a man who had conquered the world. And Jessica realized, with a crushing clarity, that she had been erased. He hadn't mentioned her name. He hadn't dragged her through the mud. He hadn't even acknowledged her existence. He had simply replaced her. He had taken the legacy that should have been Miller, the name they shared, the name she had fought to protect from his bankruptcy, and he had discarded it for the name of a dead woman who had believed in him. "Wow," Greg the dermatologist said, shaking his head. "That is powerful stuff. The ones who handed you a shovel. That's a quote for the history books." "Inspiring," Cliff Harrison agreed, raising his glass. "To the Mercer Drive." "To the Mercer Drive," the table chorused. Jessica's hand trembled so violently she couldn't lift her glass. She felt sick. She felt small. She was sitting in a room full of people toasting her ex-husband's success, toasting the very invention she had thrown in the garbage, and they had no idea who she was. She wasn't the villain of his story. She wasn't the tragic love interest. She was nothing. She was a footnote that had been edited out of the final draft. "Jess, are you okay?" Mark asked, touching her arm. "You look pale." I need some air," she stammered. She pushed her chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the floor. She rushed out of the dining room, through the kitchen, and out onto the patio. The cool night air hit her face, but it didn't stop the spinning. She leaned against the railing, gasping for breath. Inside, she could hear the TV commentary analyzing the stock implications of the launch. They were talking about billions. They were talking about Nobel Prizes. She pulled her phone out of her clutch. Her fingers shook as she unlocked it. She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the search bar. She typed in Ethan Miller contact. She didn't know what she was doing. It was instinct. It was the desperate, clawing need of a drowning person seeing a life raft. She told herself she just wanted to congratulate him. She told herself they had history. Surely, 5 years was enough time to heal wounds. Surely, now that he had won, he could afford to be gracious. She found a press inquiry email for Ether Dynamics. It was a cold corporate address. She stared at it. I was his wife, she thought. I was the one who washed his clothes. I was the one who slept beside him. But as the cheers from the television drifted through the open window, she realized the truth. She was just the woman who had watched him launch his invention on TV, and her name was nowhere to be found. 2 weeks after the broadcast, Jessica parked her leased Mercedes in the shadow of the Ether Dynamics headquarters. The building was a monolith of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the sky, a physical manifestation of the impossible wealth Ethan had generated in 48 hours. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror. She had spent 2 hours getting ready. She wore the navy dress Ethan used to say brought out her eyes, a calculated nostalgia. She told herself she wasn't doing this for the money. She told herself she was here for closure, for an apology, or perhaps to offer a truce. But deep down, a gnawing, ugly voice whispered that she was owed something. She had supported him for 5 years before the divorce. Didn't that count for equity? Didn't suffering through his failures entitle her to a share of his success? She walked into the lobby. It was silent and cavernous, smelling of ozone and expensive orchids. The security desk was manned by 2 guards who looked more like private military contractors than concierges. "I'm here to see Ethan Miller," Jessica said, flashing her most charming real estate agent smile. The guard didn't smile back. "Do you have an appointment?" "I'm his wife," she blurted out, then corrected herself, her face flushing. "I'm his ex-wife, Jessica. He'll want to see me." The guard looked at her with a flat, unimpressed stare. He picked up a phone, murmured something, and waited. Jessica stood there, clutching her designer bag, feeling the weight of the eyes of the young, trendy employees passing by. They looked at her like she was a relic from a different era. "Mr. Miller is in between meetings," the guard said, putting the phone down. "He has 10 minutes. You can wait in the executive parlor, floor 40. The elevator ride was smooth and silent, climbing so fast her ears popped. When the doors opened, she wasn't greeted by Ethan, but by a sleek, minimalist waiting area that overlooked the entire city. And there he was. Ethan was standing by the window, reviewing a document on a tablet. He wore a suit that probably cost more than her car. He didn't look up immediately. He finished reading a paragraph, tapped the screen, and then slowly turned to face her. There was no shock in his eyes, no anger, no longing. It was the way a CEO looks at a vendor who has arrived late for a delivery. "Hello, Jessica," he said. His voice was calm, stripped of the pleading tone she remembered. "Ethan," she breathed, stepping forward. She tried to gauge the distance between them, both physical and emotional. I saw the broadcast. I just wanted to come and congratulate you. It was incredible." "Thank you," he said. He didn't offer her a seat. He didn't offer her water. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back. "You look good," she said, filling the silence. "Different. Tired, maybe, but good." "I'm busy, Jessica," Ethan said, cutting through the pleasantries. "My assistant said it was urgent. What do you need?" The directness threw her off. She had rehearsed a script where they reminisced, where he got angry, where she cried and then they hugged. She hadn't rehearsed for this wall of polite ice. "I don't need anything," she lied, her voice trembling slightly. I've been thinking about us, about how things ended. I was young, Ethan. I was scared. You have to understand that. The debt, the pressure, it was terrifying for me." She took another step closer, entering his personal space. "I made a mistake," she whispered, looking up at him with wide, watery eyes. "I stopped believing in you because I was trying to protect us, but I never stopped caring. I think we let the stress destroy something beautiful. It was a masterful performance. It was the truth, twisted just enough to make her the victim of circumstance rather than the villain of her own choices." Ethan watched her. He looked at the dress. He looked at the desperate hope in her eyes. He tilted his head slightly, as if analyzing a glitch in a piece of code. "You're remarried," he stated flatly. "To Mark, an insurance underwriter." Jessica froze. "How did you know?" "I know everything that enters my orbit," Ethan said. "I have a security team that vets anyone who steps within 50 feet of this office. I know you live in Willow Creek. I know you lease your car. I know your real estate license is up for renewal next month." The precision of his knowledge sent a chill down her spine. It wasn't intimacy. It was surveillance. Mark is a safe choice," Jessica stammered, abandoning the script. "But he's not you, Ethan. He doesn't have your fire. Being with him, it's like sleepwalking." She reached out, her fingers brushing the sleeve of his jacket. "I miss the fire, Ethan. I miss us." Ethan didn't pull away, but he didn't lean in. He looked at her hand on his sleeve like it was a foreign object. "You didn't miss the fire when it was burning the house down," he said quietly. "You poured water on it." "I was trying to save you," she pleaded, her voice rising. "Why can't you see that? I was trying to stop you from ruining your life. And look, it worked out, didn't it? Maybe my leaving was the push you needed. Maybe I'm the reason you're here." She said it with a sudden, desperate confidence. She was rewriting history in real time, positioning her betrayal as a noble sacrifice. Ethan laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was dry and sharp. "Is that what you tell yourself?" he asked. "That you were the catalyst? That your cruelty was actually kindness?" He walked over to his desk and picked up a small, framed photograph. It wasn't a picture of a person. It was a picture of the garage where he had started, empty and cold, the day after she kicked him out. "You weren't the push, Jessica," he said, turning back to her. "You were the weight. I didn't fly because you let me go. I flew because I cut the rope." Jessica felt tears stinging her eyes, real tears this time, born of frustration and humiliation. "So that's it? You're just going to punish me? You're going to sit up here in your ivory tower and pretend I didn't spend 5 years washing your underwear and cooking your meals?" "I'm not punishing you," Ethan said. He checked his watch. "I don't think about you enough to punish you." The words hit her harder than a slap. Hate she could handle. Hate meant passion. Hate meant he still cared. Indifference was a void. "I have a board meeting in 5 minutes, Ethan said, moving towards the door. "You should go back to Mark. He sounds like a good man. He sounds safe. That's what you wanted, isn't it? Safety." Jessica stood there, paralyzed. She had played her best card, the emotional appeal, and he hadn't even blinked. She realized then that the money, the power, the fame, none of it was accessible to her. She was looking at it through a pane of glass that was 5 years thick. "Ethan," she called out as he reached for the door handle. "Don't you ever miss me? Even a little?" Ethan paused. He didn't turn around. "I miss the person I thought you were," he said softly, "but I haven't met her in a long time." He opened the door and walked out, leaving her alone in the silent, expensive room with a view of the world she would never touch. The elevator ride down from the 40th floor felt significantly faster than the ride up, yet to Jessica, it felt like a slow-motion freefall. The numbers on the digital display ticked down, 30, 20, 10, counting down the seconds until she was expelled back into the ordinary world she had fought so hard to secure. When the door slid open, the lobby air felt colder. The security guards didn't look up. To them, she was just another visitor, another person who had tried to get close to the sun and had been politely escorted back to the shadows. Jessica walked out of the revolving doors and into the blinding afternoon sun. She sat in her car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. She waited for the anger to return. She waited for the indignation, the self-righteous narrative that she was the victim of a cold, ungrateful man. But it didn't come. For the first time in 5 years, the narrative collapsed. She drove home in silence. The radio remained off. When she pulled into the driveway of her Willow Creek home, Mark was there, washing his mid-range sedan. He waved at her with a soapy sponge, a bright, uncomplicated smile on his face. "Hey, honey," he called out. "How was the showing? Did you get the listing?" Jessica stepped out of the car. She looked at the manicured lawn. She looked at the beige siding of the house. She looked at Mark, a good man who would never invent anything, never risk anything, and never challenge her to be more than she was. "No," Jessica said, her voice hollow. "I didn't get it. They went with someone else." "Bummer," Mark said, shrugging easily. "Their loss. Hey, I ordered pizza, pepperoni, just how you like it." He went back to scrubbing a hubcap. He was happy. He was safe. And suddenly, Jessica realized that this safety, the very thing she had demanded from Ethan, was now her prison. She had traded a chaotic genius for a comfortable roommate. She was safe from bankruptcy, safe from risk, and completely, utterly safe from greatness. Miles away, inside the glass tower, Ethan didn't watch her leave. He returned to the conference room where his board of directors was waiting. The room quieted as he entered. These were serious people, titans of industry, investors, scientists. They looked at him with respect, not because of his money, but because of his mind. "Sorry for the interruption," Ethan said, taking his seat at the head of the table. "Everything all right, Ethan?" Marcus Thorne asked, eyeing him carefully. Ethan looked at the empty chair where he had sat during the dark years, the years of solitude. He thought about the woman who had just left his office. He realized that for years he had been carrying a phantom weight, the need to prove her wrong. Every patent, every breakthrough, every dollar earned had been a subconscious retort to her laughter in that kitchen. But today, seeing her standing there, desperate and small, the need vanished. The anger evaporated, leaving behind a clean, wide-open space. He didn't need to prove anything to her anymore. She was just a stranger who used to know his name. "Everything is fine," Ethan replied. "Actually, it's better than fine. The past is officially closed." He tapped the screen in front of him, bringing up the schematics for the next generation of the Mercer drive. "Let's talk about Phase 2, he said. "We've solved portable energy. Now, I want to look at aerospace application." The meeting went late into the night. When Ethan finally left the building, the city was a grid of golden lights below him. He stood on the helipad, the wind whipping at his coat. He took out his phone. He had one final thing to do. He opened his email and composed a message to his lawyer. Subject: Final distribution. Body: Please transfer the deed to the old house on Elm Street to Jessica Miller. Pay off the mortgage. Consider it a severance package for a terminated partnership. I don't want the tax liability. He hit send. It wasn't an act of love. It was an act of accounting. It was the final balance sheet adjustment to zero out the ledger. He wanted nothing that tied him to that life, not even the grudge. He looked up at the stars. They seemed closer now. The tragedy of Jessica wasn't that she left him. People leave relationships every day. The tragedy was that she had mocked the seed because she couldn't see the tree. She had loved the man he was, but despised the man he was becoming. Ethan realized then that true love isn't just about enjoying the harvest together. It's about standing in the mud, in the rain, believing that something will grow when the rest of the world sees only dirt. He turned his back on the city lights and walked toward the waiting helicopter. The rotors began to spin, slicing through the air with a rhythmic thrum that sounded like a heartbeat. He didn't look down at the suburbs where Jessica was currently eating lukewarm pizza and watching a rerun of a show she'd seen a dozen times. He looked up. "Ready for takeoff, Mr. Miller?" the pilot asked over the headset. Ethan smiled. It was the first time in years his smile reached his eyes. "Yes," Ethan said. "Take us up. I'm done looking down." The machine lifted off, rising effortlessly into the dark, limitless sky, leaving the ground and the past far, far behind.